Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And last episode around, we didn't move forward at all. We conducted the first-year player draft, made a trade, and made a important contract offer to a player who we hope will be a big part of our future. The season's gone pretty well for the A's so far, 53-49 record, 9 games up on the Angels in the AL West, although we do have our ace, Jesus Saldana, and another important member of our rotation, Ernesto Comunez, both out for the rest of this season, and in Saldana's case, likely into the start of next season with serious arm injuries. Hopefully the depth that we have built up over time will enable us to overcome the loss of those two key starting pitchers. And while it won't impact the rotation directly, we did just make the trade that I noted to pick up an outstanding closer, Juan Padilla, 4-time Mariano Rivera Award winner, as a 2.5-month rental from the Texas Rangers. Hasn't pitched for us yet, but closer has become a problem this season. And the hope is that bringing on someone with outstanding stuff and above-average movement and control, who over the course of his major league career has put up a glittering 161 ERA plus and 67 FIP minus, will help stabilize the bullpen, and especially that ninth inning, and hopefully let everyone else pitch in roles that they are more suited to. Was necessitated by Chuck Huntley's struggles, and this is something that several of you have talked upon recently. Peter Hooper and others have mentioned it, and after the trade, Paul West kind of noted a very accurate note that it seems like Huntley has kind of fallen off the map in terms of his ratings, and he definitely has. His basic pitching ratings still outstanding stuff, above average control and average movement. And he still has that 4-pitch arsenal, including an incredible sinker, which for a reliever has made him and helped make him incredibly effective in the past. But when we take a bit deeper dive, what Paul suggested is completely accurate. If we go back just a little over 2 years ago to midway through the 2039 season, Huntley was still a 4.5, 5-star kind of pitcher. August of 2039, so less than 2 seasons ago, was a 5-star pitcher across the board with, at least according to our scout, world-class stuff instead of just well above average stuff today. But the most disturbing thing about Mr. Huntley is he's only 26 years old, and his velocity has gone from 99 to 101 miles an hour to just 92 to 94 miles an hour over the past 2 years, or less than 2 years accurately. And he hasn't had any significant injuries in that time. The only injury he's had was he missed a few days with the flu right at the start of this season. But a very strange situation for a 26-year-old who should be heading right into the prime of his career to lose 7 or 8 miles an hour off of his fastball. But unfortunately, that's what's happened to Huntley. Our hope is that perhaps he'll fare better in a less demanding bullpen role than the closer role that he has definitely struggled in this season, with a 5.56 ERA and a WAR of minus .08. Positively, we haven't signed him to an extension. We've been going year to year with him. He's set to make about $7.2 million in arbitration next year. Honestly, if he remains as ineffective as he has been this year in a less pressured role, it's pretty hard to imagine we can make a good case for bringing him back at around $7 million next year, but we will see how the rest of the season goes. And we've got offers out to all of the players we drafted. I think there's a fair amount of depth, and like the balance, we ended up with a bunch of outfielders, Norcross, Ben Menahem, Lou Powers, and Jorge Moreno, a catcher in Daniel Ramirez, 3 infielders in Daig, Kevin Farmer, and Gabe Kimball, and a couple of pitchers in closer, potential starter if we're able to get lucky with him, Mike Mercer, and then B.J. Keane, who we picked in the 4th round. Keane, probably the most controversial pick. I know that several members of the Worldwide Scouting Department wanted us to pursue Mr. Villa, who was looking for well over slot and dropping in the draft because of that. Feel between Norcross, Ben Menahem, Moreno, and Powers. We've got plenty of bats for our outfield. And this is really a year, when I think about the finances, that I want to ensure we make some money. We got cut back in our budget last year after winning the World Series, so the hope is certainly to win the World Series again this year and finally get that repeat. But perhaps equally important is to deliver a nice profit to Mr. Fisher so we have success on the field and in the boardroom, and there's no excuses for him not to hopefully get our budget up to the $200 million range for next season. So that's part of the reason why I was cautious about Villa. Keane is certainly not a perfect prospect as a 4th rounder, but he's a high school pitcher with some potential. And I will say that when I was looking at the start of this episode at our team home screen, I noticed that Jerry Stevenson, a high school pitcher who we picked in the 7th round just 2 years ago, is now listed as the 2nd best prospect in our organization, number 33 overall. Unfortunately, he's likely out for most of the rest of this year with elbow soreness, but he is a guy who looked kind of similar to Keane in terms of his profile when we were picking him up, threw in the low 90s, and didn't really think he was going to be special at anything. And thanks to some great coaching and some beneficial talent change randomness, we now think he's one of the better prospects in our organization. Certainly no guarantee that that happens with Keane. In fact, more likely than not, he does not become a prospect nearly as good. But like to get as many shots on goal as possible, and I think there's always potential. So know that the Worldwide Scouting Department may have preferred Villa. We will track him over the course of his development and see how he does and how his major league production, if he makes the majors, ultimately compares to that of B.J. Keane. So in this episode, we're likely to sim forward just 3 weeks till the end of July and the trade deadline. Not necessarily anything particularly compelling to do. We'll wait and see what happens with the offer we've made to the young center fielder, Mr. Armstrong. And we'll find out who's going to be in the All-Star game this year for whatever that is worth. Pitching-wise, Chris Patterson, a guy who we've been following since he was a prospect many years ago, is likely the premier pitcher available on the trade block. The issue is he has not pitched this year. He's just beginning a rehab assignment, was 2-1 with a 2.27 ERA in just 5 games for Tampa last year. He's now wrecked as far as his injury proneness in coming off of that torn flexor tendon that cost him most of last season and more than half of this season with the timing of it. But if the price is low enough, he could be interesting. We'll at least request a scouting report on him since it's been a while since we've seen him and he's older and coming off of a major injury. If we could pick him up and we think he'd be effective, certainly might be useful in terms of adding an experienced veteran arm into our rotation this year with Saldana and Camunez both gone for the year, and the fact that we moved on from both Chase Dora and Mike Galik this past offseason. So the injuries and the departures kind of added up into a bad situation for us, but still ultimately reasonably happy with our pitching. I think Arriola, Weiss, Blumenschein, and Baumler is a more than acceptable combination for the playoffs, particularly if Baumler straightens things out. Right now, Kevin Carmichael is in the mix, is a 5-starter, and he's done a respectable job for us. Don't feel like we have to stretch to get a starting pitcher, since we anticipate that we'll only be needing 4 for the playoffs, and we do have a 9-game lead in the division right now and the best record in the AL. But if an opportunity presents itself, certainly something that we should at least consider. Taking a look at the everyday players who are on the trade block at this point, the most interesting, at least in terms of his overall ratings, would be the catcher Alfredo Magana. Unfortunately, he's going to be out for 3 months with a ruptured MCL, and he's not the best influence in the clubhouse. So the Rangers are selling people off, finally having a rough season, but probably not the direction that we will go, and don't really know that there's anyone who would really be a impact player for our team available on the trade block. Do see a few former players, though. Jake Bowers, Jaden Boakai, Sergio Figueroa, among others, who were one-time members of our Oakland A's, and we could reunite with if we wanted to. And with the injuries this year, some of you, notably Stanley Rosella, have been asking about our trainer, and the training situation has not been perfect. Definitely don't have a Rick Jameson available at this point in the game, but we have just re-upped with Yordi Crisp rather than risking the unknown in the free agent market this offseason. It's a guy that has been with us for a decade now, but we've never really loved as a trainer. To the arm injuries we have, he is supposedly legendary at preventing arm injuries, although his rehab skills are only average. But he is generally very good at preventing injuries, also good at fatigue recovery. Rehab, certainly more mixed with him, but my thought was better to go with the devil that we know than the devil that we don't know. And although the arm injuries have really had a significant impact this year over the course of the last decade, our pitching staff has generally been pretty healthy and productive, despite having a fair amount of players who are not the strongest physically on the team. So Crisp will be back with us next year. In theory, we can always fire him this offseason if we see someone really attractive on the market and are willing to spend some extra money to buy him out. But for the time being, going to stick with Yordi Coco Crisp as our team trainer. And we've been steadily signing our draftees over the past week, still a couple waiting to hear from. Bobby Armstrong did sign that 8-year, slightly front-loaded deal that we offered him. Certainly hasn't been as good as we hoped he would be offensively, hitting .242 this year with a 93 WRC plus. But he is still a win and a half above replacement level, and he is a guy whose bat we think can develop to be a pretty interesting offensive player, combined with really good speed, outstanding base running instincts, and solid defense. And it's not a huge contract, 8 years, $48 million, slightly front-loaded, so he'll be a bit more expensive for us the next few years. But the hope is that when we start getting out 4, 5, 6 years into the future, there may be some really good value for us in this contract. And it's certainly not an untradeable contract if we decide we need to move on from Mr. Armstrong for some reason. And our A's have had a nice run since the draft, won 6 in a row starting on draft day, then lost a couple before taking the final 2 games on the road at Toronto before the All-Star break. So a 8-2 run post-draft, and 11-2 in our last 13 games. So playing some of our best baseball of the season right now. We'll get a few days off. Only 6 games left this month, late All-Star game this year. We're only 9-10 days away from the trade deadline at this point. We'll be home against the White Sox and the Angels after the All-Star break. Taking a look at where we are with the standings, with the good run that we've had, we're now up 11 games on the Angels in the American League West. And our 61-36 record is 3.5 games better than the Tigers for the best record in the American League. Colorado's come back to earth a little bit, and we're actually percentage points ahead of them now. St. Louis is surging, though, with an 8-2 record in their last 10, and they've won 3 in a row. And the Phillies at 61-33 are the best team in baseball, game and a half ahead of us for the best record in baseball. So certainly the AL West seems well within our grasp. It would be a disappointment, but not a shock if we don't end up with the best record in the American League. But with the Red Sox leading the AL East with just a .500 record, certainly feeling very good right now that we will at the very least end up with a first-round bye. And best record in the AL and the best record in baseball are both certainly possibilities for us as we sit here on July 22nd. Taking a look at the leaderboard, no one on the top as far as batters, but Federico Arriola, third in the league in ERA, and continues to lead the league in wins as he and others try to stop Steve Genus's run of 7 consecutive American League Cy Young Awards. And before we take a look at the Major League All-Star teams, take a look at the All-Star Prospects game rosters. And no position players in the Oakland organization made it. Our old friend Gianfrancesco Lamborghini, once again a member of the All-Star Prospects game, but he's 23 years old at this point, and they've got him in high A ball for some reason right now, although he has also played in Double-A and Triple-A this year. Worry a little bit that Kansas City is not developing the number 9 prospect in baseball as well as he could be. Still certainly looks like he could be a very interesting major league bat if he reaches his full potential, but at 23 years old, still playing the majority of season in high A ball, you wonder if Kansas City is really maximizing his development. Although there were no position players on the Oakland A's or in the Oakland A's organization who are on the All-Star Prospects game roster, did have 3 pitchers. David Ibarra, closer who's in Double-A for us, international free agent signing from 2037. Certainly looks like he could be a very useful right-handed arm out of the bullpen. Split the year between high A ball and was recently promoted to Double-A. ERAs in the mid-4s at both levels, but he has been above replacement level, and certainly looking at his skill set, think that Mr. Ibarra, Popeye, could be a very interesting pitcher for us in the not-too-distant future. Even closer to the majors is Danny Hubel, and he was a 14th-round draft pick of ours in 2037, 22-year-old who has just really moved up through the organization relatively quickly. Hasn't been great for us in AAA this year, 5.24 ERA, and he's given up a sickly 7 home runs in 34 1/3 innings pitched. Has that outstanding slider, and still think largely due to that slider, his stuff could be well above average if he continues to develop the sinker. Don't see him as a blue chip prospect, but certainly a 22-year-old who's throwing in the high 90s is potentially going to be great value for us for a high school pitcher that we picked up in the 14th round just 4 years ago. And then probably the most legitimate of the prospects among the 4 pitchers we have in the All-Star Prospects game is Luis Villarreal, number 26 prospect in baseball, the lefty that we made the big move for this past offseason when we traded away Mike Galik, the strong starting pitcher that we talked about earlier, as well as Daniel Blanco, who was becoming a bit overpaid as a reliever. Felt like we had enough pitching depth and felt like Villarreal was a very interesting guy to bring on board. 4-2 with a 2.98 ERA for us in 9 starts in A-ball, and we've since promoted him to high A, where he's 3-2 with a 4.17 ERA, a combined 2.3 WAR across the 2 levels. 21-year-old throwing in the low to mid 90s, and we still think he could turn into a pretty interesting starter for us. Maybe not a top of the rotation guy, but if he reaches his full potential, could definitely slot in as a excellent 3 and a more than acceptable number 2, depending on how he does develop in the coming years. And at the major league level, a very long list of all-stars for our Oakland A's this year. 7 all-stars overall, highlighted by Arriola. We've talked about the excellent year he's having, 13-3, 2.53 ERA, and 114 strikeouts. He's had to move into the number 1 role in our rotation with the injury to Saldana, and certainly doing an outstanding job for us there. Joining him on the pitching staff for the All-Star game, the rookie Eric Keech, 23-year-old former 8th-round draft pick, has put up a 2.15 ERA with more than a strikeout per inning, working as a middle reliever for us this year. The 23-year-old does hit 100 miles an hour on the radar gun. And who knows, maybe he'll be our long-term answer at closer, since we are renting a closer right now, and it doesn't necessarily look like Huntley is a big part of our future, unfortunately, with his sharp decline in velocity. Jorge Mendoza, the catcher, likely playing his final year with us, named an all-star, hitting .272, 9 homers, 41 ribbies, really good defense, a 133 WRC plus and a 3.4 WAR for the perennial all-star catcher. First base, we do have an all-star, but it's not the one that many of you thought it might be, myself included. Jonah Richards, the brilliant rookie who's platooning at first base and DH with Luis Godina, does not make the all-star team, but Godina does. 282 average, 22 homers, and 65 ribbies. He, of course, had that excellent increase in his home run power in the development lab this past offseason. Only 12 homers a year ago as a rookie and 412 at-bats, up to 22 this year, even though he's got less at-bats this season than he had last year. It all adds up to a very similar player, though, 132 WRC plus, exactly where he was a year ago, and a 2.3 WAR for the outstanding young first baseman. Chisen Iwata, last year's American League Rookie of the Year, despite missing the first month of the season, is named to the All-Star team, hitting .273, 7 homers, 43 ribbies, and a 2.4 WAR on the year, 124 WRC plus for the young second baseman. The guy who won Rookie of the Year a year earlier than Mr. Iwata, Juan Pimentel, last year's American League MVP, also named to the All-Star team. After a slow start, Pimentel is doing Pimentel things, has the batting average up to .285 with 17 homers, 68 ribbies, perfect 13 for 13 stealing bases this year, 117 WRC plus, and a 3.1 WAR for Mr. Pimentel. And our final All-Star should not be a surprise. Darnell Selvey, former first-round draft pick of ours, 304 average, 18 homers, 63 ribbies, also his 23 doubles on the year, adds up to a 153 WRC plus and a 3.5 WAR. So 7 All-Stars, and that doesn't even include the guy who is likely favorite to be the American League Rookie of the Year this year, in Mr. Richards. And despite that great run that we had before the All-Star game, despite having the best record in the AL, despite having all of those All-Stars, fan interest continues to move in the wrong direction. Just don't know what these fans in Oakland want to see from us on the field. Continue to be one of the top teams in baseball, despite the third lowest budget in the sport. But for whatever reason, when we get to the summer and the team is playing well, the fan interest continues to wane, unfortunately. And we're now post the All-Star game, getting ready for those final 6 games before we get to the trade deadline. Take a quick look, not expecting the players on the trading block to look materially different. Our old buddy Andy Toribio is on the block. Still looks like a very good defensive player, great influence in the clubhouse. He's actually developed into a captain, given that Alejandro Landin is having a bit of a down year. Could consider reuniting with him. He'd likely still be a utility infielder type role for us. You may remember, given that we wanted to go with a bit of a youth movement with the likes of Godina, Alcindor, and Richards, joining Iwata, Pimentel, and Landin on the roster. Didn't really have a spot for Toribio this year, so we took advantage to trade him away to the Braves for Chris Lance, who has been really productive for us in AAA. 31 homers and 78 ribbies in just 350 at-bats. And if we do end up moving on from the catcher Mendoza this offseason, moving Richards into that type of role, we do envision Godina perhaps as our first baseman and Lance as our DH next year. Although, as you can see, we're trying to get as creative as possible with his defensive versatility, playing him at second base in AAA, but don't really think that's something we're going to want to do on a regular basis. So Toribio maybe helps us a little bit on the margins, but I don't think he's a starter for us at this point, or we would have probably kept him along. Mike Woods, certainly an interesting bat as a first baseman, tons of speed, and he does everything except hit home runs. Rough year for him this year in the majors, though, hitting just 211 in 180 at-bats. Given that over the course of his major league career, he's about a 270 hitter. That's definitely a move in the wrong direction, having by far his worst major league season at the age of 30. He's also fragile physically and doesn't bring much to the table defensively or in the clubhouse. So I don't know that there's any obvious answers on the trade block that will really be a true impact player for us. Wonder what happened with our old buddy, whether they took Patterson off the block or whether we got a scouting report on him and he's just horrible now. Looks like maybe they took him off the block or he got traded to somebody else. Or let's see what's going on with Chris Patterson. Yeah, they've already traded him away to Tampa. They've traded him from Tampa to St. Louis. We do have the very high scouting accuracy, and unfortunately it looks like he's a pretty average-ish major league pitcher at this point. So obviously we waited too long to try to potentially pick him up, but looking at the profile, I don't think that's a profile that would be pitching for us in the playoffs anyways, so he could give us a little more depth here. But with the money he's making, I don't really think that at this stage in his career, Cowboy Patterson, as a wrecked 32-year-old, would have had a significant impact on our chances this season. So I will continue investigating the trade market and not just guys on the trade block, but anyone else who I think might be able to help us. But as we do sit here coming out of the All-Star break with an 11-game lead in the division, definitely don't feel as if we need to do anything rash. And although we lost the first game at home to the White Sox, we took the second and third games to win the series. As we mentioned earlier, they are one of the top teams in the AL Central, so along with Detroit, they are the top two candidates to chase us for the best record in the American League, so certainly very good to take 2 out of 3 against them. Heading into the final 3 games before the All-Star break, we've got a 12-game lead on the Angels in the division, and these next 3 games are going to be against the Angels, so if we can take at least 2 out of these 3, we'll be heading into the month of August and the final 2 months of the season with a lead of at least 13 games if we take 2 or 3 games in this series against the Angels, which you would have to think would position us very well to win the division and at the very least have a first-round bye. And our non-All-Star but potential Rookie of the Year, Jonah Richards, just was named the AL Player of the Week. Monster week, hit .556, 3 homers and 5 ribbies for the year, hitting .279 with 24 homers and 71 ribbies and 344 at-bats, 145 WRC plus on the season and a 2.5 WAR. As I mentioned, he and Godina are platooning with each other at first base and DH. Richards is not as good a defensive first baseman as Godina, so he is primarily playing DH, but we are playing him at first base against left-handed pitching, and we are also letting Richards continue to catch for us, once a week or so. He's caught 12 games for us this year. He is, as we've talked about, our prospective catcher of the future, given the likelihood we'll be moving on from Mr. Mendoza. So we want to ensure that he continues to work on his skills behind the plate, even though right now he's not actually our starter at that position. The thought is that Richard's bat is so valuable that for this season, at least, when we've got another great catcher on the roster with Mendoza, we'll try to maximize the number of at-bats we get from Richards by playing him more often at designated hitter or first base. And we're going to continue perusing the trade market, but we are making one minor move here. Alejandro Landin, been a below-average offensive player for us this year. This is a guy who has provided incredible value for us after being one of our first IAFA signings in this series back in 2027. Signed him to a contract when he was relatively young and unproven that he has definitely outperformed with a 125 WRC plus over the course of his career and a 29.7 WAR, even though he's not yet 31 years old, although he will be in just about a month. But he's fragile physically at this point, and his bat is trending towards league average. His speed is non-existent at this point, although he still has a good glove. And when we look at his scouting report, his home run power and his eye have definitely both regressed from where they were not that long ago. His defense a little worse also. So we, against left-handed pitching at least, are going to pivot Chisen Iwata to be our shortstop, and we're going to give Amari Alcindor, the right-handed hitter, a crack at second base. Not that Alcinder's having a monster year, but he is younger, and although Landin's a switch hitter, when we look at his ratings, he is definitely more effective or potentially more effective against right-handed pitching than left-handed pitching. Better BABIP against righties, better gap power against righties, better eye against righties. So we're going to let Alcindor, the right-handed hitter, get a little more playing time against left-handed pitching. Did consider reuniting with Toribio But when I look at Alcinder's offensive ratings in particular, I don't think there's any reason that we would expect that Toribio would be a better offensive player at this point than Alcinder potentially could be. And while he's not on the trading block, we are looking at trying to reunite with Mike Galik. You may remember we picked him up a year ago around this time from the Red Sox, and then traded him away this offseason in that deal that we highlighted earlier that brought us Luis Villarreal. But the price for Galik is not crippling. And he is a talented pitcher, also a good influence in the clubhouse. He's a guy who, on paper, probably looks better than the way he's actually performed over the course of his career. Although he does have a 107 ERA plus and an 86 FIP minus as a major leaguer. He's been an above average pitcher in the majors. But when you look at what he's done over the last season and a half, first with Boston, then with us in Oakland, and this year in San Diego, he has not been as effective. But bringing him on board would give us a more proper number 5 starter than we currently have in that role with Mr. Carmichael. Strengthen our bullpen by getting Carmichael back into the pen. And then also give us a little bit of insurance. I'd say Saldana and Weiss and Blumenschein are the 3 who almost certainly will be in our playoff rotation. But Baumler, if he continues to struggle, could certainly end up not being one of the 4 that we would really want there. And if we have Galik on board, gives us a more than acceptable option as a 4th starter for the playoffs. So you can see there's a lot of different options we have here to pick him up in a straight-up trade. Don't know that we'll do that with any of these players since they're generally looking for, as you'd expect, some of our more important major league players and some of the top prospects in our organization. But I think there may be a deal for us to find with Mr. Galik. And we've got an offer out there for Galik that can get the deal done and also get the Padres to keep 65% of his contract. So we'd really only be spending an extra $1.1 million this year, which certainly helps given our financial limitations and our goal to deliver a profit to Mr. Fisher. We'd have to give up a pretty interesting prospect. Brett Carlisle is a 23-year-old who was an 11th round pick in 2036. But he is a potential two-way player. The reason I'm willing to give him up is that I don't think he's really a big-time two-way player prospect. Looking at his pitching, he looks very average, and honestly, although he's still considered a two-way player and we try to treat him as a two-way player, he hasn't even pitched this year in AAA. He has been a regular player for us in AAA and put up a 143 WRC plus offensively. But his profile is really focused on contact and drawing walks, which admittedly are very important skills. But his gap power well below average, his home run power below average. And as I noted, as a pitcher, he's a 5th starter on a average to poor team or a right-handed arm out of the bullpen. I just don't see him being a huge difference maker. Certainly would have loved to give up someone who's less interesting because he is a guy who probably can play both ways in the major leagues. Part of the reason why I'm a little willing to give him up is that we've got Mike Homer, former 2nd round draft choice, who's also a two-way player at AAA. And Homer, to me, is a much more interesting overall prospect. Definitely a little higher end at a pitcher. Stamina, his potential control, and his ability to keep the ball in the ballpark are all higher. And I think he's also a better overall batting profile with a little more pop in his bat and still pretty good contact. And most importantly, Homer is a potentially very good defensive player in the infield. Very good might be pushing it, but he is a useful defensive player in the infield, and he can play the outfield as well. So my thought with Homer, this is like a super utility guy. Think of someone like Kike Hernandez, but he can also pitch and pitch decently. 7-3 with a 3.44 ERA on the mound for us in AAA this year, and has not been as productive with the bat this season. 78 WRC plus and 340 at bats. But a year ago, he put up a 141 WRC plus for us in 165 AAA at bats. Probably been a little more focused on his pitching this year. But having Homer in AAA and thinking that on the margins, Homer is a slightly better two-way prospect than Brett Carlisle makes us potentially willing to include Carlisle in this deal to reunite with Galik and strengthen the back end of our rotation and give us a little more insurance for our pitching staff, particularly our rotation, as we get closer to the playoffs and try to ensure that we're as well positioned as possible to win another title. So we're always striving for more. We're going to send an offer to them asking them to keep 70% of his contract, and not necessarily something they want to do, but I think if they don't accept this trade and come back to us and say, we got to throw in another player, there will probably be a player that we'll be willing to throw in addition to Carlisle to get them to keep a little bit more money. But with it only being 5% and with them being rebuilding and with Brett Carlisle being a interesting, albeit imperfect, two-way prospect, it's possible that they just look and say, hey, this is a guy who's been part of our organization for a few months. We're picking up a 23-year-old who can help us both on the mound and in the field and at the plate. Let's spend an extra couple $100,000, help these poor losers in Oakland who don't have a lot of money, and get this deal done. Doesn't seem like they jumped at the opportunity to do it, but hopefully we'll hear back from them shortly. I'm sure we will. And unfortunately, the Padres playing a bit of hardball with us. They're asking for some really good players or really good prospects to make up that 5% extra that we were looking for. And of course, now they won't do it at 65 either. Wow, they're really dropping it way down in terms of what they'll do for Carlisle. They'll only keep 45% of his contract. Now, granted, that only costs us an extra $600,000, given that we're basically at the end of July. So it's not critical, but certainly in retrospect, wish we had just sent them Carlisle and had them retain 65% of his contract. If you're wondering, I have been looking at trades, potentially including Huntley in them because of his sharp drop in velocity and effectiveness, and the fact he's still likely to be making $7.5 million next year. Unlikely that we'll bring him back at that number. But doesn't seem like Mr. Huntley, unfortunately, has significant trade value. So he has quickly went from being one of the top young closers in baseball to being a guy whose career may be on the line in the not-too-distant future, at least until someone just releases him and he's a free agent and not arbitration eligible to be making $7.5 million next year. And we can get back to the 65% of the contract retention that we could have gotten a day ago from just sending them Brett Carlisle, if we also include the starting pitching prospect Esteban Figueroa, dealing with some shoulder inflammation that's likely to keep him out for basically the rest of the high A season. 22-year-old who was a scouting discovery back in 2035, 3-4 with a 3.12 ERA in high A ball for us. But you look at his profile, and he's a borderline major leaguer if everything goes well. Not very good at holding on runners, right-handed pitcher with fly ball tendencies and modest velocity in the low to mid 90s. Just don't see him being an impact player, particularly with the type of pitching staff that we want to build. So although we've got to pay more than we would have paid a day ago, and we should have just pulled the trigger on the 65% retention for Carlisle yesterday, I think Galik gives us what we need. If, knock on wood, this hopefully won't happen, but if we have another injury to one of our starters, having a legitimate major league starter like Galik around should help us ensure that we've got 4 starters we like for the postseason. Also increases our probability, I believe, of ending with the best record in the American League and the best record in baseball. And if, for financial reasons, we decide we need to move on from Galik this upcoming offseason, we moved on from him this past offseason when he was making $10 million, or expected to make about $10 million, and is expected to make about $11 million next year. So it's very conceivable that we may want to move on from him. I don't know that we're going to get fair value in return, but we should be able to get something for him in the trade market. And in the meantime, he's a real good influence in our clubhouse, and maybe will also give us a small boost in fan interest as we head towards the trade deadline, and try to ensure that we've got a reason for the fans to come out in Oakland, because for some reason winning tons of ball games on a low budget and consistently being a playoff team and a championship team doesn't keep the fans engaged. Maybe bringing Mike Galik back on board will do it for us. So we're going to go ahead and complete the trade. No commentary on a boost to fan interest, unfortunately, but think that this still positions us well to hopefully ensure that we make a long playoff run and hopefully compete to win it all here in 2041. So we've added Galik to the roster, put him in the 4-hole in the rotation ahead of Baumler. The nice thing that Galik will also bring is more stamina than any other pitchers on our starting staff at this point, which hopefully will relieve a little bit of stress on the bullpen. Moved Carmichael out of the rotation and into a long relief role. And then we sent down the youngster Wilson Rangel, who has a outstanding skill set, but has definitely struggled in his introduction to the majors this year. So hopefully between the additions of Galik and Padilla over the last few weeks, we've stabilized the pitching staff and made up for some of the injuries that we've suffered. Padilla hasn't been good for us so far. 6 games, has an ERA of over 5, does have a win and 3 saves, but he's given up 2 home runs and 4 walks in just 7 innings pitched. So hopefully he will settle in and be better for us going forward, because the whole point of bringing him on board was to stabilize the closer role, given the unfortunate decline in abilities that we've seen from Chuck Huntley recently. And I think the reunion with Galik is likely to be the only thing we do over these next couple of days till we get to the trade deadline officially. We won yesterday against the Angels, 2 games left against them before we get to the trade deadline. So we'll continue to monitor things and look at whether there's any other deals perhaps to be had. But I tend to think at this point we are likely to stand pat. And we've won the first 2 games against the Angels, so we've had a pretty strong month of July here. Even if we lose the final game of the series to the Angels, we'll have a 13-game lead as the month of August begins. And if we beat the Angels today, we'll have a 15-game lead in the division as August begins, and there won't be a team besides us above 500 in the entire AL West. So not feeling like we have to do anything desperate, like what we've done to bolster the pitching staff, and feel that hopefully some of the moves that we've made to our lineup will help give the lineup a little bit of a boost. Although as we sit here on July 31st, boosting the lineup isn't really a concern. First in the American League in runs scored, and you can see we're first, second, third, or fourth in every primary offensive and or base running category. The worst we are is fourth in home runs and fourth in base running. 65 and 37 record we have is right in line with expectations, and we have had a nice bounce back month here in July. If we win this final game of the month today against the Angels, it will be our best month of the season. Pitching has definitely stabilized as well, second in the league in runs allowed, and our bullpen ERA is now first. You may remember early in the season it was really bad, but it's been much better of late. Starters have slipped down to third, but we are at the top in just about every pitching category as well. Ranked sixth in BABIP, good defense, fifth in defensive efficiency, second in zone rating. So not really feeling a need to do anything desperate at this point. And we did not make any more moves, did win the final game of the month against the Angels. So as we open up the month of August, a 15-game lead in the American League West. And at this point, we are 4.5 games up on the Tigers for the best record in the AL. And with this surge of 5 consecutive victories, we are now a game and a half up on the Phillies for the best record in all of baseball. So feeling real good about how we're positioned here on August 1st. Jonah Richards, again, your non-All-Star Jonah Richards, did just win American League Rookie of the Month for the third time in 4 months this season on the year, now hitting .278, 25 homers, 75 ribbies on his way to an outstanding rookie season. So we're feeling good about where the team is at this point. I think that the additions of both Galik and Padilla will help to some degree compensate for the huge losses of Saldana and Camunez. Can't argue reasonably that our pitching staff is better than it was when we had our number 1 and number 3 starters healthy and well. But the hope is that we've got enough to ensure that this team gets back to the playoffs, wins over 100 games again, has home field advantage for the bulk of the AL playoffs and hopefully all the way through a potential World Series. And as August begins, I think we're positioned as well as we possibly can be to achieve those goals. And we'll find out how we do in terms of achieving those goals in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.